I make stuff for a local kitchen store, and last week they asked me to make a railroad-themed wine rack. So, I got this, and these. That ought to do it. Now this should be a pretty straightforward build, but I do have 4 problems that I need to sort out. Problem number 1, there's a pretty fine line between rustic and disgusting. And I think this piece of railroad tie is on the wrong side of that line. It's been in the woods for probably 10 or 20 years, and while it was developing a lot of character in that time, it also got kind of wet and gross. So I spent a little time over the weekend kind of roasting it with a MAP gas torch. And I did a good job of driving off the water, but now, on top of being a little bit moldy and weird, it's also got this layer of soot on it. So I need to do something about that. I got my cordless drill and chucked in a wire wheel, and I just go to work on the outside with that. Normally, I wouldn't use a wire wheel on wood because it's too aggressive, but the exterior of this wood is already so chewed up that it doesn't make much of a difference, and it gets through the bad material really quickly. After I'm done with the wire wheel, I take a random orbital sander with some 80 grit and just pass over it quickly to smooth out the marks left by the wheel. It does a good job and it leaves a lot of the character intact, but the exterior of the wood now looks kind of dusty. And so I can't find the fitting for my air compressor, so I just use my shop vac instead, and it does a good enough job. It's no longer dusty, but now it looks a bit dried out. Now I've got to de-rust 24 of these spikes, and it takes a while for each one. That's 10, so I've got 14 more to go. 13 more to go. Once they're all de-rusted, I take them outside and hit them with some spray lacquer. It soaks in nicely, gives them a good shine, and this part of the project is done. Problem number 2. The other place that I work heard that I was making this thing, and now they want one too. But I've only got the one piece of railroad tie. It's pretty thick, so maybe I could just cut it in half? I'm using my saw stop to rip this in half, but because the wood is kind of wet inside, I have to turn off the safety features. You can see me being really careful here, because now this is just a regular table saw, because the safety stuff is bypassed, and if I touch it, I'm going to get hurt. Now, I get the 2 cuts made, but it only goes part of the way through, and I've still got to cut out that center section somehow. Here's what I came up with. I used an old strap clamp to clamp it down to the top of the saw, and then I just got a trusty old handsaw. I've got to bend it with my hand to get it into the 2 curves, because they're not perfectly parallel. And then I'm sawing, and sawing, and sawing some more. And there's still a little bit left, so I'm sawing some more, and oh god, finally I've got the 2 pieces separate. Now the sawing operation did leave a pretty significant kerf in the middle. It's too much to leave in the finished product, so I plane it off. And while I'm planing, I notice that the wood is a little bit wetter in the middle than I would like it to be. So I break out the MAP gas torch and start roasting it again. This might be the most interesting part of the project, because while I'm just trying to drive off the water, I also start seeing the grain pop up. As I'm working on this, I'm noticing that this is oak. I thought it would be just fir or pine or some other junk wood, but it's not. It's quality hardwood. This might even be live oak, a southern species that's extremely hard and tough, and it's known for having a really good, swirling, visually interesting grain. So I keep roasting it, bringing that grain out more and more and trying to make it look more three-dimensional. I've got some ideas for how I can make it look even more interesting. Back down in my basement, I break out the boiled linseed oil. It's my go-to for accentuating grain and making wood look more interesting and giving it depth. You can see as soon as the oil goes on, the wood starts to look richer, and the distinction between the grain and the burnt grain gets even more interesting. The linseed oil is also going to seal the wood and keep that soot from being a problem for the end user. Once I've got the faces done, I flip them up onto the side because the exterior still looks really dusty and dry.
The oil takes care of that, making everything look hydrated and bringing it nicely back to life. Once this is done, it brings us right along to
problem number 3. If I try to drive a railroad spike like this directly into that piece of wood, it's just going to split. So I'm going to have to drill a pilot hole. Problem is, I don't know what size to drill. So let's try a couple. Too big. Still too big. Too small. Ooh, way too small. Huh, that's about right. What size is that? Oh, it's 3/4. That makes sense. Problem number 4. I need some way for the client to actually hang this thing on the wall. It is pretty heavy. You add 4 bottles of wine, and it's going to be really heavy. So, I better come up with something strong.
I've got a piece of 1/8 plate steel clamped into my metal cutting bandsaw, and I've got the stop set up so I can make repeated cuts. You can see while I'm doing this, I add oil a lot of times. A lot of lubrication keeps the blades lasting longer. Once I've got a nice little piece of steel, I go over to the wood and drill out 2 5/8 holes. I've taken the steel piece and I've drilled and countersunk it off camera, so it's ready to be screwed in as soon as I have the mortise made. I hold it down and I use my marking knife to score the sides and get ready for the chiseling. You can see me placing the chisel really carefully for the first couple of strokes, defining the edges of the mortise, and then I move across it, scoring the waist and getting it ready to knock out. I do a little bit more work defining the edges of the mortise, and as soon as I'm satisfied that they're going to be crisp, I take the chisel bevel down and I blow out all the waste in a couple of passes. Now it's looking pretty good, but I need to make it deeper, so I take out some more waste, work a little bit more on the edges, test fit, not deep enough, so I define the edges again, test fit, define the edges some more, and then do another waste removal pass. Do another one. You can see me getting impatient here, getting aggressive. The piece of wood is moving around. I probably should clamp it down and take a deep breath, but I want to get this part done. Define the edges a bit more, and the piece goes in really nicely. Little bit more adjustment, couple taps with the mallet, and it's sitting perfectly flush. Now I need to figure out where the spikes are going to go. I've got a piece of plywood I'm going to use for my template, and I use washers to stand in for the spikes. I mark them with a pencil and then drill them out to hold this pin punch. I put the template on the wood and tap the pin punch with a hammer, and I know exactly where my holes have to go. Over at the drill press, I'm using a 3/4 inch Forstner bit. I'm going really slowly because this oak post is very, very hard and difficult to drill. I'm clearing the chips a lot because I don't want to get my Forstner bit stuck. Once that's done, I put the spikes on and I use a wine bottle to line it up and make sure it's going to be in exactly the right position. Driving them in is hard. In fact, I actually have to hit them so hard that the camera comes loose on the tripod and starts drifting to the left. I don't notice because I'm working so hard, but I do put a little beeswax on the next one to try and get it to go in easier. It doesn't help the camera problem very much because it keeps drifting to the left every time I hit the thing. I set the last one, and I'm not totally happy with it, so I turn it, tap it again, turn it, tap it again, and I'm finally ready to pound it home, and yes, I am totally out of frame, and now all we're looking at is my belly. Okay, I need to hang this thing, and my bandsaw is just taking up valuable wall space. I've got a level magnet stuck to a square, and that tells me where my holes need to be. I drill them, pound in some anchors, and then I come back and put in screws. I've been careful measuring everything and keeping my holes exactly 4 inches apart. So when I come back, the hangers slide over the screws and it goes up no trouble. I add a couple of wine bottles to complete the effect, and this project's done.
So I had this whole closing scene worked out where I was going to show you this shot of the finished wine rack, and then I was going to raise a glass of wine to you and toast you for watching, but we drank all the wine, so I can't do that. Thanks for watching.